All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. I am just absolutely thrilled at the number of people who signed up for this session. I know some of you are here with me live today, and I really appreciate you joining in. Not like you didn't have anything else to be doing in early December. I just was really amazed that so many people were wanting to come and spend a little over an hour to talk about this, but really, really grateful for that time. And I know some of you are going to be watching the recording at a later time. My name is Jessica Sprick. I am a co-owner of Safe and Civil Schools. We do work all across the country with multi-tiered system of support approaches for behavior and attendance. Also do some work with active engagement and explicit instruction. I'm also the director of development and do educational consulting work. I wanted to take a minute just to introduce myself and some of my background and why this particular topic is so near and dear to my heart and the background that I come from. For those of you who are familiar with Randy Sprick, the founder of Safe and Civil Schools, Randy is my father. I was blessed as a first-year teacher to have Randy as one of my mentors as I was working to run a semi-self-contained special education classroom for students with behavioral disorders. So I had the amazing opportunity to call up my dad anytime I needed support and advice on how to support the behavioral needs of the students that I worked with, which were pretty intensive. And I also have on the other side of things, my mother, Marilyn Sprick, who is one of the really preeminent experts in evidence-based literacy and reading in the country. I really saw this intersection with the students that I worked with where, they were being identified and placed in my classroom due to behavioral concerns, disruption, defiance, sometimes physically aggressive behavior. But the vast majority of the students I worked with also had academic concerns. And reading being one of the critical things that when I started assessing a lot of my students, they were, not just 1 or 2 grade levels behind in reading. It was like some of my students who were 7th and 8th graders were reading at a 1st grade reading level. And so I got to see very deeply this interrelationship between the academic and the behavioral components and how much they feed each other. So that was definitely, I viewed myself as an interventionist, not just on the side of behavior, but it was like, how do we help support the academic needs of these kids? Because otherwise their behavior is never going to stabilize. Now, the third part of this, I've really had an opportunity to dive into deeply because I've been the one at Safe and Civil Schools who's had the most opportunity to kind of serve as a lead in taking what we know works with behavior and applying it to the issue of attendance. So for over 10 years now, I've been working with schools across the country to develop and implement multi-tiered approaches for addressing absenteeism problems. And here's what I really came to realize is that even though oftentimes we've sort of historically treated attendance problems as like a secondary or tertiary concern beneath academic or behavioral problems, they feed each other, right? And so if students are not in school, it is feeding those academic or behavioral concerns, and vice versa. When a student is having those academic or behavioral concerns, it makes them not want to be in school. And so we start to see those attendance problems increase. So our objectives for today, for our hour and 15 minutes together. We're going to spend some time at the beginning of this session exploring some of what you all have seen as these interrelationships between these 3 areas. We're really focusing on reading problems, reading concerns, because it is such a prominent concern with students in our country, and it also has tendrils into any of the other academic work that you're doing. So all of us know, even if a math teacher is not a specialist in reading, they have to have some basic understanding of how, a student struggles with reading could be impacting their ability to read a textbook or to, access instructions and understand, even if they understand the math content. So while we are focusing on reading concerns in this particular session, any of the considerations that we're talking about in terms of comorbidity, that idea of, how an academic concern could be impacting other issues like behavior or attendance, but also, other considerations for intervention, for, how we are identifying these different concerns. You can kind of take those, the work that we're talking about with reading and expand it to other areas. So thinking about applications to math, to science, to writing, even to something like PE. I was an example of a kid that, I developed really good escape avoidance strategies for certain types of PE activities that I did not feel I was good at. I wasn't, disrupting and getting myself kicked out, but some of the absenteeism considerations that we have in place, certainly you could start to see some of that comorbidity happening. So we'll take a look at some of these relationships. We'll look at some of the research that is out there about how these are interwoven concerns. And then we'll be spending some time looking at your intervention systems. How do we look at ways that we're identifying and trying to figure out when students have comorbid considerations that may need to be designed into intervention plans? And then also getting some examples of intervention plans that are not just focused on one area. They are looking at how do we support the student in multiple facets of what may be going on. And then our last 15 minutes, I designed to be an overview of a couple of reading curricula that my mom, Marilyn Sprick, has been taking her knowledge and expertise in the field of science of reading. Before that was even a term, she was really deeply immersed in the evidence base for what works with reading intervention, and a couple of programs that she's now designed for students that are struggling readers in grade 4 through 12. So our last 15 minutes, if you're willing, if you're interested in staying with us to get an overview of what those programs are, part of what we are trying to do is we've had a wonderful opportunity to partner with American Institutes of Research for a grant-funded opportunity. It is still running. That funding has not been dropped. And so we are seeking out schools that work with students in grades 6 and 7 to be joining next year's cohort. And so it's an overview opportunity for you to get some information on that as well. At the end of our session, we will have some Q&A time, but I'm going to hold that and reserve it actually until 1:15 Pacific time. So if you do have questions and you're willing to stay a little bit longer, we can address any questions you have then. You can also feel free to email me if you'd like to get in touch with me or have a little bit of email back and forth so that we can be looking at addressing any of those questions that come up. So I am going to ask if you can hold on to your questions, maybe just write them down for yourself, and then pose them at the end of the session or get in touch with me. I am very happy to be addressing any of those that I can. All right. So as we are starting to explore these interrelated concerns, we've got this little image here, which is showing we've got 3 areas that we sometimes treat as distinct within our school system. We think about the needs of a student academically. We sometimes don't consider how that's interrelated with behavior and or attendance. But what we know is that these are bidirectional or even tridirectional. And what I mean by that is when a student has a concern with one, it can impact another 1 or 2 of these considerations. And it really creates kind of vicious circle types of scenarios. So with attendance, one of the things that I know is that when students are absent a lot in kindergarten and first grade, it often causes them to fall behind academically. It can also impact their behavior because they're not learning critical routines and procedures. They're not learning some of those, executive function skills that they need to be able to participate. And so that attendance concern can create problems in other areas. But then what starts to happen is, let's say the student is behind academically because of those attendance concerns. Now the student doesn't want to be in school as much, and so they stay home more. And now we have that vicious cycle that goes round and round. So what I'd like us to do, I'm going to give you about 2 minutes, and we're going to have some engagement with the chat box. Some of you have already been starting to do that with putting a little introduction to yourself in there. I'll be scrolling through that. So here are your directions. If your first name starts with A through I want you to take just the 2 bubbles that are academics and behavior. And I want you to just type any of the thoughts that you have on what are some of the relationships that you see one direction or another, or kind of vicious cycle effects of how does, you can take it from a positive side. When a student is successful academically, how are we seeing that impacting their behavior in positive ways? When they're doing well behaviorally, how is that impacting academics? You could also take it on the flip side of what are the negative effects, right? So when a student is struggling academically, how do we see that manifesting in their behavior, and vice versa? If you are J through R, you're going to take the left-hand two bubbles, so academics and attendance. And if you are S through Z, I want you to take attendance and behavior. So just take a couple of minutes, do some thinking, write some ideas down, type them in the chat box. What are some of the relationships that you see, either positive or negative, that are impacting students as we explore, these interrelated concepts? You've got 2 minutes. Excellent. Keep them coming if you have not had an opportunity to type in the chat box yet. I wanted us to do this little activity just to get you all kind of thinking about what are some of the arguments as we work to address these interrelated concepts, because you are going to have people in your buildings who are viewing these as very siloed types of considerations. My job is to, as an instructional coach, be working on the academic practices for our students, or my job as the behavior interventionist is to be focused on the behavior of the students. And what we really need to start doing in a lot of our systems is when we are talking about an individual student in need of support, we really need to start blurring those lines, right? Even when we're thinking about tier 1 types of supports, looking at these are interrelated, right? So I could work with a school on improving attendance, but if the climate of the school does not feel safe to students, if it's very punitive, if it's very negative, our work on addressing attendance is not going to lift in the same way. I could work with another district where we do a wonderful job in implementing classroom management practices and good school-wide climate and safety approaches. But if the academic approaches are not strong, that behavioral gain isn't going to lead to a lot of increased learning, a lot of increased gains academically. We're probably also going to see increased problems with our attendance issues. So again, part of this is really just thinking about how do we create some rationale for folks about how we build these systems working in tandem. Now, just a little bit from the research literature, and one thing I did want to let folks know so you're not having to worry about furiously writing all of this down. I will create a PDF version of the PowerPoint that I'll send out to everyone post the webinar, give me a day or two. And I'm also going to try and copy and compile some of the chat box responses so you're able to take any of those rationale pieces and share them with the folks that you work with in your buildings or your district. So a little bit of research that we know. I actually had one of our research associates do some digging into this question of comorbidity, and there is not as much out there as we would have anticipated. We definitely have some research that shows there's relationships between these issues, but it is not been explored as deeply as we might have expected. Now, with reading and attendance, we've got lots of studies that have been coming, especially since the early 2010s when chronic absence started to be more of a metric we were paying attention to. Chronic absenteeism is associated with lower reading scores across grades K through 12. But we also see that this is especially important in elementary years and especially in kindergarten and first grade. So recent study, Ansari and Gottfried 2021 found that students who were more frequently absent in elementary school showed lower academic achievement, greater levels of school stress, lower motivation and grit. And this makes sense to me from the work that we've done with attendance, but I think it's really important to highlight. They did find that negative effects accumulated across time. So those students who had repeated years of absenteeism throughout elementary school had significantly lower outcomes by the end of fifth grade in terms of their language, their literacy, their reading ability. They actually found that effect sizes were roughly comparable for the students that, again, had multiple years of absenteeism issues, that each day of absenteeism equated to a day and a half of learning skills that were missed. So we start seeing those compounding effects across time. I would have hypothesized that the same thing is true with math. So as some of you mentioned, those of you that explored the reading and attendance, our kids that are struggling readers or struggling academically may be choosing to stay out of school because they're feeling frustrated. They're feeling, they don't want to be there because they don't feel a sense of self-efficacy. They're disengaging because they don't feel competent within that system. And none of us want to be spending hours a day feeling like we can't do something, right? So that frustration with the academic component is leading to increased levels of absenteeism. On the flip side, we have lots and lots of research that is showing that when kids are missing critical amounts of school, especially when they're hitting that threshold of 10% or more, it's reduced learning time, it's reduced practice opportunities, which I think is part of why in those early years it's so critical, reduced opportunities to be learning and growing with their peers. And so it reinforces those academic difficulties across time. So we do have research pointing to, the comorbidity and the vicious cycles that occur with these two pieces of that puzzle. Now, with reading and behavior, there have been studies across time. The study that's cited here is sort of compiling a lot of different information together. Poor reading skills are often associated with higher rates of externalizing behavior. We typically will divide behavioral concerns and mental health concerns into two categories. Externalizing, which is kids who go outward with their behavior. That's our kids who are disruptive, maybe defiant, attention or connection seeking types of students. So behavior is going outward. But I would also hypothesize that poor reading skills could be associated with students who are going inward and having those symptoms of anxiety or depressive, not feeling that sense of self-efficacy is impacting their self-worth. There is debate about what drives one or the other in terms of this question of reading and behavior. But certainly kids who have poor reading, it can lead to that frustration and acting out. When they're acting out, especially if they're getting sent out of class, if they are in school or out of school suspended, that is disrupting their learning. So again, we've got that vicious cycle happening. Now, with attendance and behavior, some of the research that we have shows chronic absenteeism is often associated with higher rates of both externalizing, outwardly directed, and internalizing behavior. We do see a little bit of a difference in trend where for our older students who have more externalizing behavior, it tends to be more truancy-based, unexcused absence, or suspension. Whereas for our students that it's more internalizing, chronic absenteeism that is excessive excused absences can often be a sign of a student that's got some behavioral or mental health need, but it's going more inwardly directed. So again, with these relationships, it's sort of bi-directional. Children with behavioral concerns are more likely to skip, be removed from school, or have somatic complaints, which means they're, feeling anxious and nervous about something. And so it's a headache, it's a stomach ache, they get those excused absences. And then the chronic absenteeism can exacerbate those behavioral concerns because they're missing out on critical instruction with behavior and routines and procedures. They're not getting the peer engagement or the adult engagement and connectedness that they might be if they were in school. So all of this is just to say that we know that there are relationships here. I think you all are probably seeing that. I'm hypothesizing it's why we do have so many people that signed up for this session because you are aware of these relationships. If you are trying to build some awareness amongst your staff members, this might be an activity or a set of research studies that you could share with them to sort of unpack these relationships. Now, I do just want to share with you a little bit of sort of the national landscape of where we are at in these three interrelated concepts. With reading, we have grave concerns that we have lots and lots of students across our system, across all grade levels, who are struggling with the reading skills that they would need to be competent academically, to go out into the world and the workforce, and have the skills that they need. This research is from the National Assessment of Educational Progress in 2024. Let me just give you a couple of definitions. So we've got in fourth grade and eighth grade, 31% and 30% of our students who are at or above the proficient level. Proficient on NAEP means solid academic performance. These are students who've developed competency over challenging subject matter. They've got good subject matter knowledge. They can apply these skills, their reading skills, to real world situations. They can use analytical skills based on the skills that they have. We have 29 to 37% of our 29 and 37% in fourth and eighth grade of our students who are at the NAEP basic level. And this level is partial mastery of the prerequisite knowledge and skills that are needed for performance with skills that involve reading. So these are students who are on the path, but we still want to work to strengthen and shore up those literacy and those reading skills to really get them, let's say, college ready or able to go into a job and be, taking any sorts of tests that they might need to be taking to advance within those positions, to go out into the world and not always need, text to voice types of apps to be able to navigate through the world. But what's a really grave concern is, we are seeing levels of students below basic. These are students who don't have even the basic skills that they would need, the prerequisite knowledge and skills that they would need to be able to function academically in core content area classes, to be able to move forward in their content area curriculum and attain the skills that they need in other content areas. So 40% of our fourth grade students, 33% of our eighth grade students are at that below basic level. This is a huge concern. And we are seeing it, I think, in a lot of our schools in terms of what we're also seeing with attendance issues and behavioral issues, that when we have this number of students who are struggling with reading, it is also manifesting as other concerns. So chronic absenteeism, for those of you who are not as well versed in this research literature, chronic absenteeism is a metric that's been really gaining prominence and traction since the early 2010s. It's students that are missing school 10% or more of school for any reason. So we're actually combining excused absence, unexcused absence, and suspension when we're thinking about this metric. It's the acknowledgement that anytime a student is absent from school, they're potentially falling behind and becoming disengaged. And so we want to be paying attention to whatever the reason is, this is a critical level of risk for that student. So this metric is one that we've definitely seen a lot more attention paid to it. Now, the national research on this usually lags a couple of years behind, so we don't have concrete data from the last couple of years. But our best guess estimates are from the 2024-2025 school year. We've got around 22 to 23% of our students nationally that are in this critical red flag category. We hit a high of chronic absenteeism during the 21-22 school year, which was a high of about 30%. And that was almost double what we were seeing before the pandemic. So we're seeing some movement towards pre-pandemic levels, but we're definitely not there yet. And, even if it was 15% before the pandemic, that's way too many kids missing critical amounts of school. Now, just to make sure we're kind of talking appropriate language here. A lot of people really view that if we can get students out of the chronic absence category, they are safe. So chronic absence, kids missing 10% or more, that's like 18 days during a typical school year, are in the negative concerning category. We need to work to address that, and anything else is fine. But when we start looking at the research, there's actually a middle category, which is students who are missing between 5 and 10%. And I think it's especially important that we mention those students in this context of thinking about comorbidity, the relationship with academic and behavioral concerns, because when we think about our students who are the most fragile, they are starting to learn those academic skills, they're starting to master some things, but they're still somewhat fragile, or they are learning some of the behavioral and social emotional skills that they need. But again, those skills have not been mastered. Those are the students that probably need to be in school the most regularly to get the practice, to get the instruction, and solidify their skills. So we actually need to make it kind of 3 levels of risk, where students who are in the chronic absence category, we know that is likely to be impacting their success. It is likely to be causing them to fall behind academically. It is likely to be causing other types of concerns like social issues or disengagement. The category, so that would be our red flag category, chronic absenteeism. The at-risk category is kids that are missing between 5 and 10%. So when we do have a student who is struggling in other areas, academically or behaviorally, and we see that they're missing somewhere between 10 to 17 days during the year, we still want to be considerate that that level of absenteeism could be impacting their growth. And what we want to aim for is students in the regular attendance category. That would be, if I were color coding it green, students missing 5% or less. So especially for our students that need academic or behavioral intervention, we want to strive as much as we possibly can to try and get them missing no more than 9 days during the course of the school year. That's an average of a day per month, so that they can get that regular practice, so that they can get access to those opportunities for learning. All right. Now, with behavior and mental health concerns, current estimated rates by the American Academy of Pediatrics of mental health, emotional, or behavioral problems, we can call them MEB concerns, is that 13 to 20% of students nationally have a diagnosable mental health, emotional, or behavioral disorder. And we have an additional approximately 19% of students who might not meet diagnostic criterion, but they still have a level of concern that could be impacting their success. So my guess is y'all are seeing that in your schools when you're looking at your students who are accruing multiple behavioral referrals, who were seeing limited success due to anxiety or due to a mental health concern, that you have a fair percentage of students that could meet diagnostic criterion, and hopefully those diagnoses are getting identified and made. But you also have a whole nother cache of students who may be having concerns, but they're not going to be diagnosed with any particular consideration. They still are needing support, right? So when we're looking across these 3 different categories, we're really seeing anywhere between 20 to 40% of our students that are presenting with one or more of these considerations. So just exploring comorbidity. Here's an activity that I've had some schools that I've worked with do a little bit of digging into, is what percentage of overlap do you have between these 3 different lists if you're thinking about your students that you'd be identifying as needing like tier 2 or tier 3 intervention. So if we're looking at reading, we might pull a list of students and we are, sorting them into, these are students that may need some tier 2 support. Here's some students who may need some tier 3 support. And we might use something like students who are failing English language arts classes by a certain time period. Or if we're using curriculum-based measures or state or national measures, students that are below the 25th percentile. So we look at those cut scores and we say, here's our list of kids that we're identifying are going to need some academic support. Now, we're going to compare that list of names to our students who have attendance problems. So who are our kids? We're going to pull all of our kids at this point in the school year that have missed 10% of the current school year, or maybe we're looking at last school year. And again, we're pulling that list of names and we're saying, how many of them are we seeing that are appearing on both our reading support list and our attendance support list? Groups that I've had pull this data are usually finding somewhere between 50 to 90% overlap in these 2 lists. Then we can also do a comparison, reading to behavior, attendance to behavior. This might be students who are receiving 3 or more behavioral referrals in a year. We've got our list of names of students, and or students who are identified as at risk if you're using some sort of validated universal screening tool. Something like systematic screening for behavior disorders by Hill Walker and Herb Severson is a way of identifying students who are likely to be needing behavioral or emotional support within the school system. This can just be an interesting exercise. It's also a way to lay the groundwork if you do have some folks who are viewing these as siloed issues. My job is to be focused on academic and behavioral success of the students as a teacher. It's the counselor and the attendance clerk's job to be dealing with attendance issues. And we need some understanding of how these are really interrelated. Or if we have people who've got a little bit of blinders on in any of these areas, looking at the comorbidity for your students and really exploring how these are going to have to be interwoven intervention plans can help lay some of that groundwork. Now, let's take a look at our intervention systems. And the first thing we can look at is identification. So we are always going to recommend that you have certain data that you are collecting throughout the year. We call these red flags. That you're using like at least every 6 to 8 weeks. We are pulling particular data sources and we're seeing who flags at that point in time. Now, we may see a particular flag and we know that there's certain circumstances for the students that, tell us, we're not going to need to intervene heavily at this point in time. We're just going to monitor the student. But there may be certain flags that go up that immediately tell us, let's start intervening sooner rather than later so that we're not waiting for a more significant problem to emerge. So we're going to recommend that you have some flags that are academic, some that are behavioral, some that are attendance, and then we're going to look at how they kind of work and relate to each other. All right, so from an academic perspective, you can look at course failure. So especially those of you who are in middle school and high school levels, really trying to make sure that we've got early warning systems and that we're not waiting until the end of the term or the semester to try and be addressing any course failure. This is especially important for any of you that work with high school students. One of the most important red flags that you can be pulling academically is students that are receiving D's and F's in their first 4 weeks of school. We should have some sort of little survey that goes out to teachers or a staff activity that is asking them to look at their grade book and think about who are our kids if they stay on their current trajectory that are at risk of failing one or more courses at this point in the school year. We know that as soon as a student has failed a course in high school and they're now looking at credit recovery, we drastically increase the likelihood that they are going to drop out of the school system. So course failure could be one academic red flag that we're looking at. We also are going to strongly recommend that if you are not currently doing different types of academic universal screening, things like oral reading fluency screening for your students, that we're going to really recommend that. I see that in a lot of elementary schools, this is something that we are doing on a regular basis, but it's less common in middle school and high school. And what we know is that there are a lot of kids who are struggling to read in middle school and high school, and we may need a way to flag those students. So at a minimum, making sure that our teachers are aware if you're hearing a student reading and you're hearing them stumbling, you're hearing them having to go back and reread words, or they're reading fairly slowly. A lot of people don't know what like 120 words correct per minute oral reading fluency sounds like. It actually doesn't sound that horrible, but from a standpoint of how it impacts a student's success and their ability to work through content, it is definitely impacting students. So if we have a hypothesis a student might have a reading difficulty, we might want to pull in screening for that student at that point in time. We can also be looking at progress monitoring data academically. So you want to have some red flags in your academic arena that help us identify sooner rather than later students that we may need to be considering from an academic perspective. Behavioral red flags, we don't have like a concrete number on some of these things. So you within your school system would need to decide what threshold you would be using. What we oftentimes will say is once we start seeing a pattern developing, that's when we want to start kicking intervention into place. So something like 3+ office disciplinary referrals within a semester, or, as they're starting to edge into, 3, 4, 5 across the course of the year, we definitely want to be pulling in some of our behavioral intervention practices. But it's also beyond just office disciplinary referrals. I've seen a lot of schools, and give me a little thumbs up either on your video or using a reaction button. How many of you in your schools have some sort of, sometimes it's student can request it, sometimes teacher assigns it, but you have a separate location where a kid can go to cool down. Sometimes people call these mindfulness rooms. Sometimes they call them a problem-solving room. Like, you're going to go for 10 or 15 minutes to calm down. Sometimes I have a timeout teacher partner where the student can go cool down in another location. So I saw Kelly, Jesse, Carolyn. Okay, so quite a few of you, as I'm scrolling through here, have these opportunities in your school. Now, I love the intention behind these, but I worry that in some schools they've gone a little bit off the rails because we're not collecting centralized data. So here's what we need to be very, very careful with. These types of approaches can be really beneficial because they do give a kid if I need a break, or a teacher is seeing a kid is starting to escalate and ramp up, they need to just kind of take a breather for a minute. It gives that opportunity. But it can also become a huge escape avoidance for both the student and the teacher, that just like anytime there's a struggle, that kid is going to go elsewhere. And now we're actually dealing with attendance concerns and potential academic deficits because the kid is not in class. So we are going to strongly recommend that you keep centralized data. Anytime the kid is out of class for something like a break or a timeout or something like that, that we are keeping data that is being monitored at the office level. And every 6 weeks or 8 weeks, we're analyzing that data to see where are we seeing patterns where the kid is going too often, too many times, especially during particular classes or particular activities. And that's going to kick us into intervention practices. This is actually also the same. Another data source we're going to strongly recommend that you are monitoring is having your nurses and your counselors keep on some sort of spreadsheet who is coming when, and that we are tracking patterns. If we are seeing a student who is coming frequently to the nurse's office, to the counselor's office, that we're monitoring that, that's actually going to be one of our best ways to start identifying some of our students who might have internalizing types of concerns. They're not getting office disciplinary referrals because they're not acting out. They're trying in a pro-social way to get the help that they need. But when we see a pattern across time and it's not being intervened with, again, could be leading to absenteeism, could be leading to academic deficits. So we want to use these metrics to help us identify where might we be creating inadvertently kind of those compounding concerns. All right. Now, with attendance, we are going to want to monitor, again, every 6 to 8 weeks, who are our students that are starting to flag in the chronic absenteeism category. So in your first 20 days of school, on day 20, you should pull a list of all of your kids who have missed 2 or more days of school at that point in the school year and be starting to sort of triage. There are going to be some kids where it's like, okay, I know that this kiddo had pneumonia and missed 3 days. So, we're not going to intervene heavy. We're just going to make sure that they knew we missed them while they were gone and that we're excited to have them back. But we're going to watch them a little bit more closely for the next 20 to 40 days to see if that pattern continues or if they stabilize. There are going to be some kids, 20 days, they missed 2, 3, 4 days in that first 20 days of school. And it immediately tells us we need to start intervening, either because there's been patterns of absenteeism in the past or because we see it's relating to other concerns. This is a kid who is fragile academically. And we think that if we don't get them here regularly, that's going to create concerns for their academic success or behavioral. We also would want to look at students who are in the at-risk category, missing 5 to 10% across an extended period. So this might be at, 6 months into the school year. Who are our students who have missed, enough of the school year that we could be hypothesizing it's creating concerns for them. All right, so we've got our identification processes. Now we want to think about the interventions that we're putting in place. And this is where in many, many locations, we get so hyper-focused on the one area of concern that we're seeing that we may miss some of the other signs and symptoms that are happening. So we treat the presenting concern. The kid is behind academically. What is our academic intervention? And maybe we even have a team that is focused on academic intervention practices, and we're referring the kid to that team. Kid has a behavioral concern, so we are referring that student to our counselor, social worker, or behavior interventionist, and they are focusing on how do we improve the behavior of concern. Or attendance. Kid has an attendance concern. What is our attendance intervention? But what we really need to consider is that idea of comorbidity. What if the presenting concern is actually a symptom of something else that is going on? So the kid has an academic concern, but when we start to look at their attendance patterns, we're like, if the attendance stabilized, would the academics not be as much of a concern? I had one group that I had the opportunity to work with from Washington State, where they actually had an article that was written in their local paper about the great universal attendance work, prevention work that they were doing with attendance, and then some of their intervention systems. And it started out with talking about a young man who I think was in maybe fourth grade. And he was starting to be identified for specific learning disability, for intensive academic intervention. When they started getting good attendance practices in place and his attendance stabilized, he moved from he's on our list of tier 3 support for academics to now he's on tier 2. Then eventually it was tier 1. And once they stabilized the attendance, the academic concerns went away. Right. Now, that's much, much easier the younger the students are. The longer these vicious cycles have been happening, the more we may need to intervene in multiple areas. So the other question is, what if it's an interrelated concern, right? We could work to address the academics, but if we don't get them here, they're not going to lift the same way. By the same token, if we don't lift the academics concurrently, the kid is never going to want to come. So we're going to work to try and create intervention plans that help us apply this thinking about comorbidity. All right. So let me give you an example here. I worked with a school that had a student, I'm going to call her Janelle, and she was identified with attendance concerns in 7th grade. Now, a little bit of information here. This was a district that had not been monitoring chronic absenteeism up until this point in time. They had really been focused on truancy. So when they did look back at her attendance patterns, she had history of chronic absence in other years. It was just that they identified it at this point because they started paying attention to the metric of chronic absence. So she's a kiddo who had excessive excused absences. These were usually excused absences due to illness. And when they talked to mom, it was, she's not getting major serious illnesses, but she's oftentimes complaining about her stomach hurting, her throat hurting, her head hurting. And so I let her stay home. So here's what the school did. They had a meeting with her mom and her, and they were really emphasizing from a very positive, supportive way. Janelle has such great skills. She has so much to offer, but we're really concerned that her attendance could create long-term concerns, both in school and out of school. Here's what we've learned about attendance. So they were doing a lot of positive messaging and trying to kind of ask, are there any supports that you need to put in place? Janelle's mom was like, no, I agree. This is important. I'm going to try and make sure that she attends consistently. To add a little bit of extra bonus to it, the school wanted to get Janelle excited. So they put her on an attendance contract where she could earn some small rewards if she was able to boost her attendance. And she had a store that all of her friends got to shop at, and she didn't because they didn't have a lot of money. So they had some extra funds that they were able to do, for each day of attendance, you're working towards this small certificate that you might get. So Janelle was super excited, right? And the school was all ready to go. They were super excited about putting this in place. And here's what happened. It got better for a little while, and then it dropped off again, and it actually got worse. So she started getting dropped off by her mom at school and then walking home and starting to skip. This wasn't a super safe neighborhood for her to be doing that. So the question that they had is, why was she not able to sustain this improved attendance? And really for Janelle, it was that her absenteeism was a symptom of something else that was going on. And this is what we see in so many cases, is when we try and intervene with one thing, even if we've got some good interventions in place. And I saw Michael, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name right. That's quite an intervention or incentive for a public school. Absolutely. This was a school that was doing a heavy focus on attendance. They had fundraised, they'd gotten some grants. So they had some good resources available. And it's don't we all wish that we could put that in place? They put some good things in place and it didn't work. Why is that? right? And it's because what they were doing was not addressing the root cause of the problem. This is where we really start to think function-based intervention. How do we apply interventions that are helping us understand and then work to address whatever is the underlying cause? Now, here's what they found. When they looked back at her attendance record, she had inconsistent attendance almost every year, except for second grade. And so second grade, let's talk to the school, let's talk to the teacher and find out if they've got any insights, if they remember this student. And here's what the teacher shared with the team. I remember Janelle. She was a super sweet student, but she was really kind of nervous with social interactions, and she felt very, very uncomfortable, like talking in front of the class. So I always made sure that she was seated with another student that she really got along with. And like if she had to do a presentation, she was going to present to me or present to her peer, not to the whole class. So that teacher had identified what ended up becoming the root of the intervention. She had extreme anxiety about speaking in class. And once they identified that, it all kind of made sense, because this was actually a school that had gone to popsicle sticks as an intervention. I love randomized call on, like you give a group of students a question, you have them talk to each other and come up with ideas, or you have them write something down, and then you randomly call on a student. Gives additional accountability for all students to participate. It prevents us from, having that one or two students that we always call on and everybody else is taking a little bit of a nap. But what we also need to recognize is even our best practices, we have to analyze what could possibly go wrong, right? And so something like popsicle sticks for a student who has anxiety about speaking out in front of others in class, especially if they've got some issues with confidence or the skills that they have academically, this could actually spike attendance concerns or behavioral concerns, right? I can always start to identify who are the kids that have reading difficulties in a class if a teacher is using the antiquated, not super effective practice of round robin reading, because you start to see the kids starting to act out and try to get themselves sent out of class as it's getting closer to them, right? So for Janelle, school identifies that she's got extreme anxiety about speaking in class. This is manifesting as absenteeism problems, but the bigger concern is not the absenteeism. It's the fact that she's got some of this anxiety about public speaking, about looking foolish in front of her peers, right? So what might we do with our intervention efforts? How are we going to repurpose our interventions or redesign our intervention plan based on this knowledge? We can't just incentivize the attendance and get mom on board because we're not addressing the root cause. So let's go ahead and in the chat box, type some ideas. What might you do if Janelle was your student? And Caroline already gave us one starter there. Ooh, Chris, great idea. Good. Catherine and Patty, thank you. Excellent, Sabrina. I love that you went to coping strategies as well. Andrea, communication system, excellent. Good, Shelley, signal between her and the teacher. Ashley, yes, having a pass opportunity and maybe like whenever I would have a student pass if they were called on with a popsicle stick, it was like, I'm going to come back to you at the end to share a good idea you heard from somebody else. So it's scaffolding the skill, but you may have some habitual passers and that tries to prevent that from becoming a problem. Good. Okay, so you all are coming up with the same ideas that this school ended up putting in place. So what they did is short-term accommodations. All of the things that you all were talking about that were ways of giving her a pass opportunity, taking her popsicle stick out of the jar so that she knows she's not going to be cold called on. It was things like getting the teachers to go over, and if you see or you hear that she's got a good answer that she's written down or talked about with her small group, Janelle, would you be okay if I called on you value for that. And, she's more likely to say yes because she knows she has the right answer. You might encourage her to write it down so she's got it in front of her so that when you do call on her, she doesn't forget what she's going to say. So we're basically meeting her where she's at, right? And this is exactly what the second grade teacher did, is she accommodated. She said, I see that this is a concern for Janelle, so I'm going to meet her where she's at and make it so that I'm removing that discomfort so that now the attendance is no longer a problem, right? But here's the problem if we stop there. And it's why I think it was Sabrina and a couple of other folks, I was super excited to see that you talked about like long-term coping skill building, is we can almost debilitate a student if we only accommodate, right? If we know that there is an ability that we could teach across time, that we could gradually build those skills for that student, we're opening up doors of opportunity so that she doesn't feel like, oh, now I can never participate, I can never respond in class because she's never had the need to practice it, right? So what they also did is they worked on building long-term coping skills. This is where we're pulling in counselor, social worker, school psychologist, somebody who's got some knowledge and expertise, or someone who can work with the teacher to teach her things like deep breathing techniques. There's a strategy called 4-7-8 breaths, where you breathe in for 4, you hold for 7, you breathe out for 8. There's other mindfulness tricks you can use. There's progressive muscle relaxation. So basic coping skills that could be taught and sort of prompted for her to use those skills as we pull off some of those accommodations. Rather than focusing on attendance, notice the focus here is on addressing what was causing the attendance problems. The attendance was an outcome that we're using to measure success of the intervention. Now, here's the great thing. With these interventions in place, Janelle's attendance stabilized, and she's now got more of an ability to be able to function within the classroom environment. All right. So this is an example of where we can start to treat these as interwoven concerns. Sometimes one will come to the forefront where it's like, we need to work to address this first and see if other good things happen. A lot of times it's going to be we are addressing them concurrently. So what we would recommend is that in your problem-solving approaches at the earliest stages of intervention, you may have different layers of ways that people are talking about students who need support in different areas. And we have a red flag that identifies a student. So we're talking about an academic consideration. As part of that academic problem solving, we want teachers, we want interventionists to all have enough basic knowledge and awareness to be questioning. Is it possible that some or even all of the academic concern could be an attendance problem or could be a behavioral concern? So we've got a student who flags academically. Let's look at their attendance record. Have they been missing 10% or more? Did they miss 10% or more of critical instruction in early years? They missed kindergarten and first grade a bunch, so maybe they got really lagging skills in that way. Are they missing critical instruction and practice opportunities during particular times? So even if the student is not absent all day, if they come in late 3 days a week, 20 to 30 minutes late, and they're missing a good portion of their reading block, could that be impacting their academic success? So part of our plan needs to be really working on stabilizing the attendance. On the other side, is the student's behavior impacting their academic success? So they are struggling with remaining on task. They're struggling with following directions. And so part of our academic intervention also needs to be behavioral. Now, I am toying with a tool. It's in very, very draft format, but I basically am taking where we would take academics at sort of the top of this and ask some questions about attendance and behavior. We can also do this with behavior and ask questions about attendance and academics and thinking about where might those behavioral concerns be in part or in whole driven by one of these other considerations. And then I also am working on it for, the attendance and the relationship with behavior and academics. I am going to send that tool out to you all probably sometime in the next 2 weeks. And I would love to get some feedback on would this be a helpful tool as you are working with teachers, working with interventionists to get them, they have a student in front of them presenting with a particular concern, but let's think about the comorbidity of these other concerns and where it might fit within our intervention practices. Okay, so I'd love for some feedback from all of you. Now, in terms of your team problem solving, I know that a lot of schools will have separate teams that are working on tier 1 for academics. So we may actually have several different teams, like a English language arts team, a math team, et cetera, that is looking at how are we putting best practices in place for that particular academic area. You probably also have some sort of universal behavioral team. Our version of school-wide PBIS, Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports, is called Foundations. So that would be an example of like a tier 1 safety and climate. And some schools now are also having a tier 1 attendance team, or attendance is part of what that behavioral team is doing. So it makes a lot of sense when we're talking universal systems for all that we might treat these as somewhat separate issues. But when we get to tier 2 and tier 3 intervention, and we're talking about an individual student, now is where we really get to whole child thinking. Okay. So I'm going to strongly recommend, if you have some sort of child study, problem solving, whatever you call it, multidisciplinary type of team, student support team, but basically the team that is meeting, you get referrals or you pull your data on your red flags and you've got your list of students who need intervention support. I work with a lot of schools where I've seen they have a separate tier 2, tier 3 academic team and a separate tier 2, tier 3 behavior team. Gets even worse if you add a tier 2, tier 3 attendance team. If we are talking about individual students with this knowledge of comorbidity, we need to have them be one team. Right? Or we might have, if you have the capacity to have multiple teams, that you've got multiple teams at different age levels or different, subgroups that you have within your building. But that when we are talking about it, we are looking at a child. If a kid is identified with a behavior problem, we are looking also at academics and attendance, so that we're not separating out and treating these as unrelated concerns. We'll design interventions to address any of those known or hypothesized factors. So let me give you a couple of examples of where we can start to interweave intervention. If we're taking the example of reading and attendance, we have a reading group that is a remedial reading intervention, but students have inconsistent attendance. And here's one of the things that I have seen and heard from my mother, Marilyn Sprick, as she has worked to field test and she works very deeply with schools that are implementing her approaches, is she now knows one of the number one questions that she asks when a teacher is bringing, here's students that are not making adequate progress. Her first question is, what does their attendance look like? And it is almost always the case that the kids that are not making adequate progress are the ones that have inconsistent attendance, right? So if that were the case, let's work to blend these interventions. In that reading intervention group, let's consider how we teach the importance of attendance, how we make it a part of, the messaging that we give, even behaviorally. As part of this group, we are working on teamwork, we are working on perseverance, and then you're tying that to attendance. So that language and that messaging is just being infused. We are sharing with families. Your student is in this intervention group where we're focused on reading, but one of the number one things that you can do to help your student be successful in this group and learn these reading skills is to make sure that they're here every day at school, that they come on time. And then we can consider something like a group motivational system. So here's one example. This group motivational system is where each student is working on their own towards a reward, but they're getting it in the group context. So you have 10 note cards and you write a number on each note card. There's 3 note cards with the number 5, 3 with the number 4, 2 with the number 3, 1 with 2, and 1 with 1. You put those note cards in a bag or in a box. And at the end of the week, if it's a 5-day week, we're going to draw one of those note cards from the bag. If I draw a 4, any student whose attendance matched or exceeded that number, so any student who had 4 or 5 days of attendance is going to get access to the mystery reward. If the student had less than that, then they work to try and participate the next week. Now, this mystery reward is basically where you work with your students to identify items, activities, things that they would like to earn as a part of the system. Some are real small, some are a little bit bigger. And then they don't know what they're winning until you draw it at the end of the week. So it's a way of just keeping that excitement going. So that's one example of a motivational system. Another possibility that would motivate a group in trying to work together towards, achieving that goal is set a goal for improvement of the whole group. So if this is a class that has 18 kids and we're averaging about 14 a day, we might set a goal of 15 or 16 students. We're not going to set 18 because it's too far off. It could be too punitive for students. We want them to earn the thing quickly. Each day, the group's attendance matches or exceeded that goal, they're earning a point towards a group mystery reward. So again, we've worked with students to identify the rewards. We put them in a bag or a box, and they don't get to see what they earned until they have X number of days at the goal. What you would do is start with fewer days. So if I were doing this with a group, it might be like when we have 3 days at or above the goal, and it doesn't need to be consecutive. Like we get it on Monday, we don't get it on Tuesday, we get it on Wednesday. We've met 2 days towards that goal. Whenever we hit 3, we get to open up what that mystery reward is, and we'll put that reward in place. Then we'll start over, right? Then maybe the next time it's 4 days, then the next time it's 5 days. If we're doing really well in meeting that goal, maybe we move from the goal was at 15 to now it's at 16, and we're just gradually pushing the success of the group across time. So we can definitely interweave these concepts. Same thing with like behavior and reading. This is very similar to the example that I gave with Janelle, where we want to be thinking about short-term accommodations. Kid is struggling with reading, we start seeing their behavior is manifesting as part of that concern, that frustration. They're maybe trying to get themselves sent out during activities that involve reading. So we need to work on accommodations. How do we ensure that they are not being triggered by the reading activities? So it's them doing partner reading with a peer that they feel safe with. It's them having recorded text that they're listening to, other types of accommodations that we might put in place. While in the long term, we're also thinking about what are the remedial reading instruction practices through tutoring or small group intervention that we're working to design across time. So we've got reading intervention, right? But at the same time, we have these behavioral concerns. Let's set a goal for the target behavior. So if the student is off task during these reading activities and disruptive, we're going to be working towards increased time on task and decreased numbers of disruptions. If they're refusing to follow directions and participate, or they're not remaining in their assigned area, or they're leaving class, maybe we're working towards increases in amount of time or the number of opportunities. We're working to graph and celebrate successes with the student on the behavioral targets, really focused in those tasks and activities that involve those reading skills. All right. So with all of that in mind, that was a very, very quick overview. I'm hoping we'll have the opportunity to do a few more of these that dive a little bit more deeply. But I want to just take a few minutes to share with you the 4th through 12th grade reading interventions. I was a middle school teacher. I worked with 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students, again, most of whom had pretty significant academic difficulties. And I was always searching for high interest, comprehensive intervention programs that would help address the academic needs that the students had, but that were high motivation. Because when you get kids who have been struggling to read for years and years, they are oftentimes not super excited to be a part of an intervention group. And again, that manifests in behavioral concerns or attendance problems. I actually put several of my students who were low enough in my mom's kindergarten through 2nd grade reading programs. She has some programs called Read Well at the kinder through 2nd grade level. And I had to make sure that my students were like hidden around the side of the classroom. And we had a signal if anyone was going to walk in the room, we would cover up the materials because they didn't want anyone seeing that they were working in these, very young student types of materials. But the students made astronomical gains with reading. And what I oftentimes saw is their attendance and their behavior stabilized once they were having those greater levels of success. So I'm super excited to be able to share with you a little bit about the Third Quest intervention, and then some of the other corresponding programs. Third Quest was designed to be a comprehensive reading intervention, and Maryland was originally really targeting middle school and high school students. What she has now seen is there are some schools that are doing Third Quest in 5th grade and then the precursor program in 4th grade as a way to try to stabilize students before they get to middle school. But this is a comprehensive reading intervention, meaning a lot of the programs that are out there for adolescent readers are very targeted. They're focused on, you may have an intervention program that's focused on fluency, a separate intervention program that is focused on comprehension, vocabulary, etc. This intervention is designed to try and shore up all of those skills concurrently. And it has a very, very strong focus on the motivational aspects of very high interest content for the students. She built in a lot of my dad's behavioral practices in terms of building, some of the social skills that the kids need and those motivational skills. And then she also built in some study skills. So I'm going to show you a quick video, and we actually have the wonderful opportunity. We have Shelly, who is one of the teachers you're going to see on this video, who is on our call. And when we get to the end of this little overview, if any of you have any questions for Shelly, I'm putting you on the spot. I'm sure she'd be happy to answer any questions that you all have. So let's take just a quick minute to watch this video.
For years, we have noticed that we had so many kids that were struggling readers. And we tried other programs and they weren't working. And I started the Third Quest and it just took off because they did so great. And it was just performance. We saw that it was working. Then we said we need to make this an all-day thing. So now I have 6 classes a day with kids that are struggling readers.
Part of why I like this series of programs is because for middle school to find something that's engaging for them, that meets middle schoolers where they are developmentally, but still reaches their reading level has been like nothing I could ever explain. It's just absolutely a dream come true. And so this has impacted lives and not just improving their reading.
I can't think of a better investment we have made in especially the English Language Arts department than tiered reading interventions. And it's made a huge difference for the kids in my content area because the skill building and the foundations that are happening in that reading intervention are transferring directly to their success and their confidence in the ELA world.
I've been teaching for 31 years, and this is the happiest I've been. And I think it's because of the kids. When you see the kids making progress and you see how proud they are of themselves, this is where we see the tangible, progress that they're making. And it makes all the difference.
I read a book a couple days ago, and I would have never been able to finish a book before. But if you're struggling with reading, you should definitely do it. It definitely helps.
I used to be real slow at homework, but now I'm just breezing through it. It will boost all your attributes of talking, listening. So I feel like it will definitely help you out.
So in ELA, when everyone had to read, I never really wanted to go up, so I avoided as much as I could. And just wasn't the best reader. But when I did the Third Quest, I started learning a little more about reading, and it helped me a little more. I can actually read the stuff on the paper now. It's I can read 10 times better.
All right. So huge thank you to Shaler and the teachers and students and administrators at that school. It's just such a wonderful example of what can happen when we provide the supports to the kids that they need. I always loved just you can even hear it in kids' voices or see it in their affect where, they're just feeling so much more comfortable and confident and excited to be a part of the learning environment because now they can finally do the things that they're being asked to do. Marilyn has such wonderful stories, and I'm sure, Shelley, you do as well, of she had one student that, all of the peers had known this was a kiddo who had really struggled with reading, and he volunteered to read in one of his content area classes, which he had never done before. And at the end of reading the paragraph, all of his peers stood up and gave him a standing ovation because they were just so proud of him and the success that he was showing. So, if you are interested in this intervention, just a little bit of information here. It really is designed off of what we know from Science of Reading and like the adolescent literacy IES practice guides and things is very, very aligned. She worked to try and build a program that helps systematically kind of break bad habits and rebuild foundational skills. So everything from, kind of gradually building on a basic phonics sequence and teaching multisyllabic word reading strategies. There's a very strong fluency component. Just a little example here, and just watch the kids' reactions. The girl's tears at the end when Marilyn tells her fluency score. Let's get this.
Tuffin said he wanted to study mummies. In the blink of an eye, the team was in a room. The 6 travelers were invisible. A terrible smell filled the room.
186.
So one girl's about to clap, one girl gets real excited. This is what we start seeing as kids celebrating each other's successes. She worked to build a very strong engagement component. So there's actually kind of a time travel fictional story that is 50%, and it's interlaced with, as these students are traveling to different eras in time, there's strong informational text that actually is aligned with the World History Common Core content standards. So students are learning about, everything from the age of mammals to Mesopotamia to ancient Egypt. And we get comments from folks that like kids are asking if they can be a part of the intervention because they're hearing such cool things from their peers and getting excited about it. Had one student who asked if he could take the book home to his sister so that he could read it to her at night. These are things that we just, I get so excited about because, you've got struggling readers who that's a challenge to get them to want to read outside of school. So just a little quick bit on implementation basics. This is designed to be a small group intervention, so it's more targeted. It probably fits within kind of the tier 2 realm of your educational landscape. Sort of a sweet spot is a teacher with 8 to 12 students getting periodic assistance on oral reading fluency testing from an assistant or somebody else in the school. Could be done in smaller groups or one-to-one, and very periodically we've seen could edge to slightly larger groups with 2 teachers if it's more of a co-teaching model. There's some fluency entry information here that you'll have on your slides. In terms of time requirements, it's 75 lessons. So we have found a few schools here and there who can do it in a semester, but it is very, very tight. It does not leave a lot of time for assemblies and interruptions and other things. Far more effective is if it can be a year-long intervention where there is a little bit more wiggle room. And the lessons are 55 to 60 minutes a day. So if you have shorter lesson times than that, it's basically going to mean 2 lessons per day. And it probably then needs to become a year-long intervention. So if any of you are interested, or if you know folks within your district who are interested in exploring being a part of a grant-funded opportunity with this, American Institutes of Research received a grant. It is still running. We actually had a pilot year last year, and we have our first cohort who is training and implementing this year with really great success that we're seeing so far. It is for districts or service districts that have 2 or more schools that have 6th and or 7th grade. So this could be a K-8 school, it could be K-6, could be 7-8, could be 6 through 8, as long as the school has one or the other of those grade levels, and you've got 2 schools that are sort of able to partner in implementation. This is a randomized control study. So the way that works is if you had 2 schools or 4 schools or 8 schools or however many, half of the schools would be randomly assigned to receive the intervention next school year, and half would receive it the following school year. So there is a little bit of a wait list consideration there. Implementation year, schools will receive free summer training, free materials, and ongoing support from Marilyn and her team. And the commitment is to organize 1 or more instructors. We have some schools that actually have multiple instructors that are participating as part of their school. Each group is 8 to 12 students. And like you saw with Shelley's school, they started with 1 section and it gradually increased to additional ones because there were so many students that could benefit. Provide data and monitoring activities. So if you're interested in exploring more about that grant, you can use the QR code here or contact based on the email or the phone number that is there. Just a little bit more information. There is a parallel program that is actually more virtual tutoring based instruction. And the nice thing about this is it does not require a person who is a teacher. It could be a grandparent. It could be an instructional assistant working with a student. Could be you set up a tutoring program before or after school. And these lessons are half of the sequence that is in Third Quest. So some schools are also using it. We had one school that actually did Third Quest with all of their fifth graders in California. One of the great things that they shared with us is that the behavior of all of their students really started to stabilize when they were able to get that good reading instruction. They are considering using Parallel Universe with their fourth graders to get them an even stronger start going into Third Quest in fifth grade. So there's more information on that on the website. So just a couple of quick opportunities for you all to be aware of. There are 2 training opportunities coming up if you think your school is interested and ready to move fairly quickly on getting Third Quest or Parallel Universe up and running. Third Quest January 13th and 14th, it's virtual training, and then Parallel Universe virtual training on January 20th. We also are super excited to let you all know that Marilyn and her team are working on the next level after Third Quest, which is really designed to just get the kids to fly towards college readiness, towards any opportunities that they might need regarding reading. You can request a free overview, web overview consultation opportunity, and also explore any of the programs and materials at thirdquest.com. And then from a behavioral and an attendance perspective, we have a couple of things coming up. So there are some public sessions in Chicago and Dallas in the winter, and I'm going to be delivering 3 different one-day sessions in each of those locations. The first day is classroom management. The second is analyzing your full behavioral MTSS approach. And the third is putting in place MTSS across the continuum for attendance. The way it's set up is you can sign up for 1, 2, or 3 days, any that meet your needs. And then we also have some opportunities at the Safe and Civil Schools National Conference. Anita Archer will be doing a 4-day explicit instruction session. And we have 5 of our Safe and Civil Schools consultants doing different sessions on behavior. So if you are interested, please feel free to go to the upcoming events page at Safe and Civil. If you are interested in any more information about our behavioral or attendance services, or getting in touch about explicit instruction or active participation, you can also go to safeandcivilschools.com, and there's a contact us portion at the bottom of the page. All right, so I think we're at Q&A. So if any of you are interested in staying, if you have any questions, please feel free to stay. I'm actually going to stop the recording here.